Hi, thanks for joining us at the family table where we have conversations that shape the way we parent.
We are Rich and Cori Clausen. We've got kids 6 to 12 years old, 4 of them, and we're excited about this conversation. We have 2 principals from our local area. What are they seeing in schools? What are we looking for as parents? How do we engage?
Totally.
All right. Thanks for joining us, you guys. Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah. My name is Dustin Purnell. I am the principal at Parish Middle School in Salem-Keizer, right in the heart of Salem.
Mm-hmm.
I have a wife of 16 years and 3 boys, 5th grade, 7th grade, and 9th grade this year. This is my 6th year at Parish Middle School.
Oh, wow.
I've been an administrator at South Salem High School and then down in Grants Pass at North Valley High School, and then was also a teacher at Sprague before that. So
great.
Yeah.
And I'm Matt Thatcher. I'm the principal at Cascade High School, which is just down the road, technically in Turner, Oregon. And I've been there about 19 years and 15 as the principal, the last 15 as the principal, before that assistant principal, and even prior to that for 10 years over in Eastern Oregon. And my wife Jennifer, we go to church on the hill here, and we've been married for 31 years, and we have a daughter, Madison, who just graduated from Western Oregon University and lives local, and then my son, Austin, is actually in my high school where I work, and he's going to be a junior, assuming we go back to school at some point.
Totally.
Yeah, so yeah, that's us.
Okay.
That's great.
Just tell us about high schools and middle schools these days. Let's just start there. So what's the culture? Is everyone just hanging out, chatting a lot, throwing the football in the yard?
Yeah.
Not really, but these quintessential, what is real time? Is everyone on their cell phone? What does it look like in our high schools and middle schools? Walk us down the hall.
Okay, well, it's crazy for one. Parish is the first middle school that I've been in since I was in middle school, and so the difference for me from going from high school to middle school is definitely the energy. There's a ton of energy. Instead of telling kids, hey, let's hurry up, let's get to class, it's slow down, let's walk in the halls, let's not run into anybody. And so there's a lot of energy, but they're also a lot of fun. We're a school that does not allow cell phones during the school day, so we don't have an issue there. That said, there are kids on their cell phones all the time. So technology is a huge component of our kids' lives. But I would say, just tons. I would describe it as tons of energy.
Okay.
And I think you're right. I know you were kind of joking about just kids throwing the football around and stuff. Some of the same things that we all experience in high school and middle school are the same things that kids are struggling with now. What do I want to do with my life?
Yep.
How's my family doing? How do I relate to my peers? How do I be successful in school? And how do I manage all that while I'm going through puberty and navigating life? So in that way, it's a lot of the same issues that kids face. As I do think it's more challenging because of technology, and we can talk more about that, because of all the information that's thrown at kids, because of all the new and unique pressures, not just during COVID, but new and unique pressures that kids are facing. So in some ways, the challenges are identical. In some ways, they're just ramped up because so much is thrown at kids so early.
Yeah. So. What are those pressures? Let's just talk about those pressures, or what?
Yeah. What are some of maybe 1 or 2 of the biggest pressures you see year over year that kids are facing?
Yeah.
And has that changed from 5 years ago?
Yeah, and I've been in high schools the whole time of my career, and I would say in the last 5 years, even the last couple of years, a big one that kids face is that technology piece. And not just technology in and of itself, because there's some great things. Obviously, we're able to do this because of it, but because of this constant pressure to be a certain way, believe a certain way, feel a certain way. Kids, before, they could turn it off from time to time. If you had hassles with another student, or the challenges in the lunchroom, or even somebody said something out loud or sent you a note, you could turn it off.
Yeah.
Now, whatever the conflict is, whatever the issue is, whether it's interpersonal between 2 students or the social media presence, this is how you're supposed to live your life, this is what you're supposed to look like, this is what you're supposed to do, is constantly invading them 24/7. And so even if we don't have cell phones at school for the most part, if a kid's been on it all weekend, all evening, all night, for example, then as soon as they walk in the door, that pours into the school. So both.
Do you see that? Anxiety, depression?
Exactly.
Is it suicide? Are these real things? You hear these statistics. Are they actually happening? Do you see these in your halls?
I think absolutely. I think that's something that all of those things are. I wouldn't say regular occurrences, but they're not uncommon either. And I think image is the biggest aspect thing that kids are going through and trying to figure out who they are and how they present. And I think the technology magnifies that as well.
So identity, right? I mean, could we kind of frame that maybe around identity, who they are possibly, or?
Well, and maybe image in terms of in their peer group.
Yeah.
Okay, how they fit,
That's
maybe?
kind of the big issue. And that's not a new pressure, right?
No.
That's more, Matt, I think what you're saying is it's a more constant pressure,
it's not a new pressure. But even like 5 or 7 years ago, not that everybody had the same set of values. Of course, that wasn't true. But there were these universal things that were important in terms of identity and values and integrity and character, what matters. You know, Judeo-Christian ethics seemed like it was more universal. People had a lot of belief systems, not everybody bought in, but we came to the table with a certain set of, these are the things that are important to us and are our priorities. That's not necessarily the case now, or at least that's not the case on the edges of society in terms of the competing for kids' attention. So not only do they have to figure it out, there's not a framework, there's not a foundation for most kids and a lot of families about this is the starting point, this is what's important. And so when you take away that foundation and that platform, then kids are struggling even before all those pressures come. You know.
Does that present itself in the schools behaviorally or in ability to learn or focus, or I mean, how does that?
I mean, I think that is part of it. They come with so much going on, baggage, image, social media presence, push to be online, to take the extreme position, whatever it might be, and that happens. It happens in the classroom with distraction. It happens with, like you mentioned, depression. It happens with anxiety, and that's why. And that's really why, even though we're a public high school, why the teachers that we have there, the relationship is so important. This is why us doing online school only right now is so challenging, because if we're truly going to help shape a kid or shift or work through that stuff, maybe they're getting it at home, but a lot of them aren't. Right. And if we're going to be able to somehow impact that kid in a positive way, then that relationship is the piece that's going to be grounding, and that's a part that those kids need for sure.
So how can parents engage in that? You know, and maybe parents, maybe where there's two, so maybe they even have a little buffer, but what about that single parent? So can you just talk about how parents can engage into identity, into just these pressures? How do you have conversations with your kids? When do you have conversations?
Yeah, well, I think that's the important piece, is to have conversations.
Okay.
And I think sometimes that can be difficult if you have two working spouses or a single parent, but I think making time to have conversations, to check in, because otherwise the students are left on their own with their device or with their own thoughts, and they're not sure how to go through a situation.
And device can be interpreted as peer pressure.
Absolutely.
Right?
And so what would you ask them? What's a very practical question that you would ask your teen?
Well, I guess maybe I would say that's two-part.
Yeah.
How do you guide them in identity?
Yeah.
And how do you engage them in that identity? So
As they're navigating it, right, probably.
how do you guide them in terms of telling them what's right? Because it seems like we've heard a little bit of a constant theme of we still need to be parents in today's day and age, and we still need to establish some norms and some rights and wrongs. So how do you establish that, but then how do you engage them in what's actually going on? Because there can be a right and wrong, and then there can be this is where they actually are.
I think that's a great question, especially as kids transition into high school, because there is this more independence and there is this kind of drop off, right? Everybody's volunteering in the elementary school. Some parents are engaged when kids are in middle school. I hardly see any parents in high school, So and that's kind of by design, because kids are becoming independent.
Older,
So that's natural. But it is, how are you still able to make those connections? I think that the most important thing, like Dustin said, in terms of sort of having conversation, ask questions. It's not a time to, lecture, and not a time to say, hey, you better not be doing this. Necessarily ask questions. What did you mean by that? What did you see? What did your friends, that kind of thing. Ask questions and get the conversation going by getting the student to talk. And no, even if you're a single parent or you're a foster parent, you can ask the right questions. And I think that then you still need to be engaged. Maybe you can't come down and volunteer in the PTO when you're at work, or there's an 11th grader, but there's a ton of after-school activities going on, and sports and programs, band, choir, drama. Get your kid engaged in those kind of positive things, and then be there and be a part of it. And so there is something to connect to. And honestly, it's not just about parents. when kids get into that high school range, you've got to find a way to surround your kid with other positive role models that can feed into their lives. Because even my own son is 16. Sometimes he doesn't really listen or want to hear what I have to say.
He doesn't want to hang out with
Exactly.
you.
Exactly. I know. It doesn't make any sense at all.
I can't relate to that at all.
But
Yes,
if I have somebody like Rich around who could pour into his life,
Totally.
then, or a youth pastor or someone else, a mentor,
Yeah.
this is a perfect time in high school, especially, to go find those people that you trust and surround your kids with people that could pour in their lives in a positive way. If you're a single parent, you do not have to do it by yourself. Get some help.
Yeah, I would echo that. Get your kids involved and support them, and that support doesn't have to. I think I see parents that feel guilty because they can't be at the game after school because they're at work, and that shouldn't be the case, because I think support can look like, yes, being present, but also pouring in and asking questions and encouraging your kids to be involved and to continue to work hard and all of those things.
So help plug them into things.
Absolutely.
Because I think that we're blessed in that Cori is able to stay home, and we've just made a decision that that's what we're going to do. So we shape our lifestyle around it. But it's not for everybody. It's not possible for everybody.
Right.
So that time in middle school and high school, I would guess, is where decisions are being made, where kids are able to stay home alone after school. So I think that sounds like a great idea. Just that idea of, okay, what can you do in that afternoon time as opposed to coming home and playing on the Xbox or whatever?
Well, the research is overwhelming in terms of kids that are successful in high school. And there's two things. One, have a great freshman year. So we do everything we can to make sure your students start successfully. And as a parent, I would say, be engaged with your students' teachers from the get-go. If they start well, they'll finish well. The research is crystal clear. The other thing is be involved in other positive things outside of the normal school day. I mean, no matter how great Cascade is, if it's just the 8 to 3, it's not gonna meet every kid's needs. So whether that's sports or drama or clubs or student council or anything else outside of the school that is a positive experience is a big thing in terms of future success in schools, for sure.
Technology, how is that impacting relationships for kids now, right? I mean, pretty much everyone has them, right? I mean, would you say for the majority of your kids in your school all have cell phones? I mean, pretty commonplace. So how is that impacting relationships? What do you guys see, And then maybe what are you doing with your own kids? You see some things, and then are you adjusting for your own parenting based on that?
I will say, even though we don't allow cell phones, when we have drama or issues come up, most of them stem from something that happened on Snapchat or something that's occurring right now on Snapchat. And so, one, I would say my kids are not going to have Snapchat on their phone.
Okay.
At least as far as I can tell. But I mean, speaking of my kids, we just got our 3 boys a cell phone to share for the first time. So they haven't had a phone, and they've bugged us, and they say all their friends have it. But we also haven't seen a need, and now we're seeing, okay, there are absolutely advantages. So that's not a judgment on whether kids have phones or not. But I do think that sometimes we as parents think that there is a huge necessity for kids to have them and have them on and be on them all the time. And it's
Connected,
Yeah, and I don't know that that's there.
Yeah.
So
I definitely agree with Dustin, and my philosophy's changed a little bit at the high school. There's a little bit more flexibility, obviously, with high school kids. You've got 14-year-olds, you've got 19-year-olds, so they need to start making some life choices. But I've shifted a little bit in the last 2 or 3 years. I thought, well, you know what? They need to learn how to manage themselves, and so we're not going to have it in class, but we'll let them have it at certain times, and really leave it up to the teacher and the kid to manage. And that sounds great, it just doesn't work. Here's why. You can't manage something if you're addicted. If you're not addicted, you could probably self-manage. But if there's an addiction component, then self-managing is impossible. Frankly, adults can't self-manage very well in technology.
Exactly.
So for kids to be able to do that effectively at school is not happening. So we've taken a more direct approach. And that's what I would say as a parent. I mean, it can consume time and energy if you're not careful. So there needs to be some parameters set, both at school but at home, in terms of time frames and access to specific programs. Not to be melodramatic, but it is clearly the biggest challenge in schools right now is this constant consuming of online technology and all the resources. It's the biggest challenge for sure.
So
wow, that's interesting.
Did you have something?
No, go ahead.
I wanted to ask
Shocks me.
because we're just like right in the thickets and you guys see it. So do you recommend like software, blocking software? Do you recommend just like, oh, let's just hit the heart and just let everything go and we just like, have these dialogues? Or do you just kind of slowly move into, how would you direct us, as we are slowly, and how would you direct other parents as they're trying to make good decisions on filtering some, they're going to see pornography, right? So we can't pretend that it's not going to be there. So, how do we address these things that we want to address from a biblical worldview?
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of both of those, trust but verify, right? You tell your student, your son, your daughter, you say, you know what, I trust you, we've given you a great set of values, but we also all need to be accountable. So I'm going to trust you, but I'm going to check. I'm going to have access to your phone whenever I want it. And I'm not here to say what's the best way to do it. I don't know if tracking software is the best way. We personally don't use it right now, but I do think it's a great tool.
Right.
But I do think there has to be some way where there is these surprise spot checks on what's, let me have your phone. I better be able to get to anything I want to whenever I want to.
Yeah.
And then also just setting time parameters. You're not going to put your phone by your bed and a big thing at high school is kids are on their phones till 2 and 3 in the night, picking it up every time it beeps, and they're coming to school exhausted.
So what are practical ways that talk about that in the home? Where can you keep these devices?
Yeah, I would say both a time when there can be family time, whatever that is for you. Let's say it's between 6 and 8 p.m. Everybody's off, something like that. But also that there needs to be, in the evening, a complete disconnect where students are not tempted because it buzzes to. So whatever you put it in the parents' room, or you put it in some kind of a common area where kids can't have access. Clearly, that's not the only thing that's going to solve it. You're right, but there needs to be, like you said, some practical steps between why do we value this, why it's important, but also we're going to help you manage because you're a teenager.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And I would say within our network, we don't have any software on our machines, but within our network, we can shut down certain devices. So that's at night we do that.
Okay.
I think that for us, we also don't allow our kids to take either their Chromebook or their phone in their rooms.
Okay.
So they're always out in public. Now,
Yep.
we might adjust the Chromebooks because we found out in the spring that it was a challenge to have 3 boys in the same room trying to go through class. And so we might adjust that a little bit, but I think that the accountability is huge, as Matt was saying, and having a trusting, loving relationship, but also having part of that is accountability.
Yeah.
And so,
what do you see for parents who just hit a home run with their kids? Their kids are emotionally healthy, they're socially connected, and they're, I don't tell my kids this, but to be honest, I don't really care about the grades. If they're emotionally healthy and socially connected, I'm feeling really good about that because that's going to serve them in the long run. I want them to be up on the grades, but that's kind of tertiary to me.
Right.
That's a big word. I like that.
Oh, I don't know what that means. Come back to my 5th grade education. I'm not going to say, okay. I won't tell you the elementary schools and middle schools in Salem I went to.
I guess maybe if you could give an example, or if you had a couple of parents in mind that you just said, man, they have rock star kids, they have done a great job. What are maybe 1 or 2 takeaways of what those parents did or do well on a day-to-day basis with their kids in middle school and then going into high school as well?
First of all, I think, I know we see great parenting across all demographics. So it's not just a certain demographic, these guys know how to parent. It's across the board. There's great parenting going on. And I think parenting, honestly, is the key word. And we see parents who just want to be friends and want to support our students in everything that they do, and whatever they do is fine. And that most of the time, if not all the time, is not good for the kid, and it's not the right approach. And so being a loving, supporting parent and encouraging your student to take healthy risks and get involved and go beyond their comfort zone, but also being a support and a safety net, being in control of your family too. So
I would just add some of the things we've already talked about, right? Surround your kids with great people and have some consistency and ask questions and be involved, to be engaged, all that kind of stuff. But I totally believe that's important. But also, it seems like the best parents are healthy themselves, meaning they have a great spiritual life, they have a great marriage.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't focus on parenting, you should, and all the stuff we've talked about is important. But again, the foundation comes from a couple other things, which means, where are you? Are you grounded in your faith? Are you continually spending time in the presence of God? Because if you're built up, not only will that impact your kid, but they will see that you're living that life. Same thing with your marriage. If you have a great marriage, or one that you're working on, even with the mistakes, but people see that you are together parenting, or even if it's a single parent, your other relationships are healthy. Your relationship with God is your top priority. That has a huge influence in our school. It's a public high school, right? But every year, when you walk through graduation, many of the kids who have been successful over those 4 years, whether it's single parents, two parents, whatever, the parents themselves have worked on their health, emotional, but let's be honest, spiritual health, and if they're in a marriage relationship, that's healthy as well, and it impacts their kid in terms of stability and confidence and consistency, those kind of things. So besides all those specific things in parenting, those fundamental pieces give the kids a huge leg up.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder to us. We chose early on to live life in parallel. We actually quit jobs where we were literally commuting opposite directions, north and south, so we could be together. But I'll be honest, man, with the 4 kids, sometimes we just all we do is survive. Yeah. So actually, I love the reminder of we define our family. We define who our family is and providing that safe place. So that's great.
Can I just add, I think that there's a lot of pressure that families have to have their kids involved in everything. So we've been talking about involvement, and involvement's important, but I think it's also possible to be over-involved, and so activities are driving our lives, and I think part of being grounded in our marriage and spiritually is not being
too spread
everywhere all the time.
Hey, what conversations should we be having with our kids? And how do we broach those? I always get nervous, when we're about to hey, let's talk about, and then I'm like, oh, why can't I say this? And then my daughter's like, no, not the talk, But what are these conversations? Should we talk to our kids directly about sexting? Should we talk about pornography? Should we talk about dating? Are there conversations we should be having because they're going to learn them, and they're learning them anyways, so we need to be broaching,
And do you find it better to learn it from the parents or...
Their peer group, right?
Peer group, or
Well,
which is more awkward.
Especially more from the parents, even than before, because again, a lot of those topics, there were some fundamental agreements about what the priorities are, what it should look like, but that's not necessarily the case. Not at a public high school, probably not even some private high schools, definitely not from peers. They're all over the map on those issues you just talked about, where it's sexuality and substance use and relationships and a million other things that are going on in the world right now. And not only that, the extremes are out there, and both sides are yelling. So you have to have those heart-to-heart conversations. Of course, in the beginning, it's a little bit awkward to talk to your teenager or younger kid about whatever it is, sexual issues.
Is it at the dinner table though, or is it when you're strapped in the car? What's the best setting?
I'm not sure there's a great setting for that, but I mean, it's somewhat uncomfortable. And even in all your relationships, if you're having some kind of tension or some kind of struggle, having that hard conversation is uncomfortable. It's not gonna be any different with the kids, but it's way worth it. I mean, it's way worth it. I mean, the alternate is they get misinformation, or they don't know your values, or they don't feel comfortable coming to talk to you about it later. So for all those reasons, stepping out there. Now, of course, it's timing and how many kids at once, and which parent seems to navigate that better with which kid. You know the kid's heart, so you know which parent should probably talk about a specific issue. I mean, that whole thing. But there's no subject to avoid, because I'll guarantee you those subjects are not being avoided in the lunchroom or the classroom. You know what I mean?
Yep. And they're appreciated by kids. I think it's probably more awkward for me than it is for my kids. And it's awkward, but I think that they're so much appreciated, those conversations, and our kids respect us as parents for caring enough to have those conversations.
We interviewed one couple, and they called it free information.
Free information. We have some free
their friends
information.
knew what it meant.
And at least your kids don't also have to go and live with the high school principal at school too. So we're gonna have the conversation there, and I'm gonna go have the conversation with his friends at school. It's great.
Totally.
So I have one more. I have one more question, and then we could start wrapping up. But I think a big fear of mine as a parent is a reality of, what happens if my kids get into school? I mean, they transition into middle school and a bunch of schools are pouring in, right? So all of a sudden they might have had this great social group, but maybe that social group got split up because that happens in districts. What if they start getting plugged in the wrong social group?
Or wrong friends,
Yeah, just the wrong group of kids that you're just like, oh my goodness, this is not going where I wanted it. Right. Do you have any practical advice or knowledge of what parents have done to help engage your kids in that, or extremely change schools, or, you know, kind of what is a good way to navigate getting kids into the right social group?
I think the adults in the school building can be very telling. So talking with a counselor, talking with students, teachers, asking, and parent-teacher conferences, most of our, like Haley and I, my wife and I's conversations are about our kids' social life. And tell me about how they're interacting, who they're interacting with. So those are the kinds of questions we ask. We ask about learning too, but we want to know more about our kids' integrity and how are they interacting and who they're interacting with more.
How approachable are teachers? I mean, how comfortable should we feel just reaching out, calling the school office?
Dustin is right on the money. If I was not already in the school where it's easy to tell what kids are doing, I would for sure come down and talk one-on-one with my students, teacher, counselor, administrators. I'd be there when I could for evening games and just look around. I'd have the kids over to my house and be the place where kids come. That's one good way, which parents do. But seriously, teachers are not to pick and choose which are the good kids, but to say, here's the kids that are making healthy choices. Here's who your kid's hanging out with. I'm kind of concerned about this relationship. They're very accurate and they're very honest, and they want people to engage with them when it comes to the kids at their school. Teachers are very open to that.
That's great. I love it. So I guess maybe in closing, any thoughts you have, just whether there's anything about we talked about, but it's kind of mic drop moment. If you just had one piece of advice to throw out to parents out there, whether it be parenting or kids in school, whatever it is.
Well, we've already talked about this a little bit. Dustin mentioned it. I've been reading a book by John Eldredge, Get Your Life Back. And it really is about pulling back and not being involved in everything. And even as families, parents, couples, over-engaged, even in whatever, social media, emails, work stuff. I mean, even in my job, as most people's jobs, I love it, but it could easily consume you, right? Because you're there, you're there 14, 15 hours a week because stuff's going on every night, band, choir, concerts, graduation, football game, whatever, which is all great stuff. But also, and then you're easily accessible. You get an email from a parent on Saturday night, and you're rolling your eye. So it's easy to let the outside pressures take up every moment. And so I'm talking about pulling back as families, spending some time, and couples, prayer, reading the Word, disengaging, just being together and being quiet. So if the problem is too much information coming in all the time for kids and families, one of the solutions is what's a way to set a hedge around your kids and your family that protects some of that time. And so that would definitely be something that I personally have to consider is what's a way to still do excellently at everything I put my hand to, but also not let it consume and not leave time for quiet with your kids.
That's great.
Good word.
Thank you.
Our kids know our priorities, and so that might be a good question to ask. What's our family's priorities to you?
Because that really
can
interpret it.
That's a great question.
Because it really, hopefully, as Christian parents, that we have a foundation of God's Word, and our mission as a family is to honor and glorify Him in everything that we do. And so that's going to play out, or it's not going to play out. And so having those family conversations about, what are we doing to accomplish our mission and our goals? And so
we've been talking about values through these sessions, these conversations, and that's been coming up a lot. And values, which kind of lead into a family mission statement idea. And Now, it's an interesting take as your kids get a little older, because we're not there yet, to say, hey, what are our values? Like, are we doing okay? It's kind of a report card, I guess,
and sometimes I do ask them, what do you see as my top priority? Like, I ask my kids when I'm with them, like...
Cleaning, Mom.
Oh yeah, that was what they just recently said. They're like, you're like always cleaning. But to me, I'm like, oh wow, that's how. See, if they say it, then I'm like, I need to work. I need to reflect that. Like
Absolutely.
that isn't a priority. I just do
That's
that
really
to
not.
keep order in my life.
I'd rather not do any more cleaning.
Now you're
Maybe you
doing
guys
all
can
the
help with that.
cleaning. Exactly. So, well, thanks. Yeah.
Thanks for being here. We really appreciate
thank
your time.
You so much
and-
Absolutely.
and your perspectives.
It's been fun. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So thank you all for joining us again for this session of the Family Table. I love the conversations. I feel like they're very formative for us, especially with a 12-year-old heading that way. I mean, she's going to be in 7th grade this year, so
for sure.
we got to get on our ball.
And I love the intentionality and ways that we can engage in these ages. I think sometimes we just engage, when they're little, and we got to keep these conversations engaging. So
That's good. We really appreciate it. As we've been saying probably every session,
yep.
make sure you stay engaged. And I actually really enjoy the concept of, it's not just about who we know and our friends and our family and our churches, but man, engaging the teachers of our kids,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Bring them on our team. Yeah. Gather.
Well, you do a good job of, not me so much, but
Well, we're a team. It's okay.
yeah, that's good.
I think.
You think?
We are definitely a team.
Okay, good.
Thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week.
All right.
That was really bad, Ray.
That's great. That's what I want.
He'll edit it.
I want the reality.